The family court waiting room on Adelaide Street smelled like burnt coffee and broken promises. Nora Osei sat on a hard plastic chair with a crack running down the middle, her hands folded in her lap, wearing a gray wool coat she had picked up at a Value Village on Queen Street West for $18. It was a good coat. Nobody in that hallway knew that. Her ex-husband, Brandon Holt, was there too, standing about 12 feet away with his new girlfriend Tiffany, who wore a leather jacket that probably cost more than Nora's monthly grocery budget. Or at least, that was what Brandon wanted everyone in that hallway to believe. He had arranged them like a tableau. Himself in a tailored charcoal blazer, Tiffany with her highlighted hair and her rings, and their lawyer, a man named Gerald Ostroff from the firm Ostroff, Patel and Associates on Bay Street, who carried himself with the particular arrogance of someone who charged $400 an hour and wanted the whole world to know it. Nora had no lawyer. She had told the duty counsel she would represent herself. And the duty counsel had looked at her with the kind of pity that people reserve for stray animals in the rain. Brandon glanced over at her. Then he said something to Tiffany. Tiffany laughed, pressing her face into his shoulder, and the sound of it filled the hallway. Does she even know what a financial disclosure statement is? Tiffany murmured, not quite quietly enough. Did she fill it out in pencil? Brandon smiled. Not the smile Nora had fallen in love with 12 years ago, the one that used to appear when he was genuinely delighted by something. This was the other smile, the performance one. She filed her own briefs, he said, by hand. I almost felt bad for her. Gerald Ostroff checked his watch. Nora kept her hands folded. There was a security guard near the stairwell named Quam who had nodded at Nora when she walked in that morning and said quietly, "Hope it goes okay for you today." That was the only kindness she had received since parking her 11-year-old Honda on the street, 3 blocks away, because the courthouse lot charged $22. And she had decided that $22 was $22. What Brandon did not know, what Tiffany did not know, what Gerald Ostroff with his $400 an hour confidence did not know, was that the coat Nora was wearing came from Value Village, but the watch on her wrist, hidden under the sleeve, had been a gift from a board of directors in Vancouver 14 months ago, when she had closed the acquisition that put her company, Meridian Capital Partners, on the front page of the Globe and Mail's business section. She had not told Brandon about Meridian. She had not told anyone in this building. She had spent 7 years building it from a consulting practice, run out of her kitchen table in Scarborough, into one of the most quietly effective private equity firms in the country. And she had done it under her maiden name, Nora Osei, while Brandon Holt called her financially irresponsible and told dinner guests that his wife dabbled in small business stuff. She had planned to tell him eventually. She had planned to tell him when the time felt right, when she was sure he loved the woman and not the balance sheet. The time had never felt right, and eventually she had realized that was because Brandon Holt did not love the woman. He had stopped loving the woman sometime around the 3rd year, when the consultancy started taking her away from home on weekends, and he began to feel that her ambition was a form of disrespect aimed specifically at him. He had filed for divorce 8 months ago. He had filed with a prenuptial agreement in hand, one Nora had signed at 26, when she had nothing to her name, and Brandon had a rising career in commercial real estate and a mother who wore Hermes scarves to Sunday brunch. The prenup gave Nora a settlement of $30,000 and nothing else. No claim on the house in Leaside. No stake in the investment properties Brandon had accumulated. $30,000 and the Honda. Gerald Ostroff had called it generous. Nora had not contested it. Not yet. She had let Brandon spend 8 months believing he was evicting a woman who clipped grocery coupons. She had let Tiffany redecorate the Leaside house while she was still technically living in a rented condo on Gerrard Street East. She had let Gerald Ostroff file motion after motion, each one designed to humiliate her into accepting the settlement and disappearing quietly. She had her reasons. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A single text from her COO, a woman named Dr. Patience Anand. Board approval confirmed. Transfer executed at 9:02 a.m. We're ready when you are. Nora put the phone back in her pocket. She had 20 minutes. Courtroom 7B of the Ontario Superior Court of Justice had fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly unwell. Justice Margaret Okoro presided, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the expression of someone who had seen every variety of human foolishness this building could produce and was no longer surprised by any of it. Gerald Ostroff had arranged Brandon's side of the courtroom like a legal performance. Binders, color-coded tabs, a laptop with a presentation queued up. Brandon sat with his shoulders back and his jaw set in the particular way he had when he wanted to appear decisive. Nora sat alone at the respondent's table with a notepad and a pen. Mr. Ostroff, Justice Okoro said, I understand you are bringing a motion for summary judgment on the matter of the prenuptial agreement and OC's financial disclosure. That's correct, Your Honor. Gerald rose with the practiced ease of a man who had stood up in courtrooms 10,000 times. My client's position is straightforward. The prenuptial agreement is valid and enforceable. Ms. OC's financial disclosure indicates no material assets beyond a small consulting income and a 10-year-old vehicle. She is attempting to delay proceedings in hopes of extracting a more favorable settlement. We are asking the court to confirm the agreement and allow this matter to close today. Justice Okoro looked over at Nora. Mrs. OC, you are representing yourself? Yes, Your Honor. The court can arrange duty counsel if you need more time to. I'm all right, Your Honor. Thank you. The judge looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded. Very well. Mr. Ostroff, you may continue. Gerald Ostroff moved through his case with the smooth efficiency of someone who had never once had to worry about the outcome. He entered the prenuptial agreement. He entered Nora's financial disclosure. He entered a printout of her consulting business registration, showing annual revenues modest enough to confirm, he said, that she had contributed nothing of financial significance to the marriage. Brandon watched from the petitioner's table with his arms crossed and his expression magnanimous, the look of a man performing his own reasonableness. She's had 8 months, Gerald said, spreading his hands. The respondent has had 8 months to retain counsel, to engage a financial advisor, to prepare a challenge. She has done none of these things. She appeared today with a notepad. Your Honor, the prenuptial agreement is valid. The settlement is generous. We would like to put this matter to rest. He sat down. Justice Okoro turned to Nora. Miss OC? Nora stood up. She was 33 years old. She had grown up in Scarborough, the daughter of a Ghanaian-Canadian nurse and a retired transit driver. She had gotten into Rotman on a merit scholarship, graduated first in her cohort, spent 4 years at a consulting firm in Calgary before moving back to Toronto and starting Meridian from nothing. She had never once in her professional life walked into a room and let it be known, immediately, that she owned the room. She had always let the room figure that out on its own. Your Honor, she said, I have a few submissions. First, regarding the prenuptial agreement. It was signed under conditions I would characterize as materially imbalanced. At the time of signing, I was unrepresented by counsel, which the petitioner was aware of. I have case law if the court would like it. Gerald Ostroff leaned over to Brandon. He whispered something. Brandon's expression shifted. Not much, just a small tightening around the eyes. Second, Nora continued, the financial disclosure I submitted was accurate at the time. However, I would like to submit a supplemental disclosure this morning. She reached into her bag and placed a document on the table. It was bound, professionally printed. She slid it toward the court officer. What is this? Gerald said, half rising. It's a financial disclosure, Nora said. That reflects my full asset picture. The court officer brought the document to Justice Okoro. The judge began to read. Her expression, which had been neutral, did not change, but she turned a page. Then another. She looked at Nora. She looked at Brandon. She looked back at Nora. Miss OC, the judge said carefully, when was this? When did these assets come into existence? Most of them have existed for several years, Your Honor. I operate under my maiden name for professional purposes. My ex-husband was not made aware of the full scope of my business interests during the marriage. Why not? Justice Okoro asked. Because I was not certain that the knowledge would have been received in a way that supported the marriage, Nora said. And then later, because I was no longer certain the marriage was the kind I wanted to save. The courtroom was quiet. Gerald Ostroff was looking at the document with the expression of someone who has just stepped off a curb they did not see. He leaned toward Brandon and said something. But Brandon was staring at Nora with an expression she had not seen on his face before. It was not anger, it was not contempt, it was something slower. Something like the moment when a person realizes, with full clarity, that they have committed an irreversible error. At that moment, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. The woman who walked in wore a dark navy suit with the kind of quiet authority that does not need to announce itself. She was perhaps 55, with silver-streaked hair and the measured pace of someone who had appeared in rooms like this many times and had never lost. Behind her were 2 associates who carried leather document cases embossed with a gold crest. Your Honor, the woman said, walking to the front of the room with a slight bow. My apologies for the timing of this entrance. I am Beatrice Solomonides, senior partner at Solomonides Quan & Crawford. I represent Meridian Capital Partners and its principal officer, Ms. Nora O.C. Gerald Ostroff stood up so fast his chair rolled back and struck the railing. This, Your Honor, this is procedurally irregular. Counsel cannot simply appear mid-session without M. Solomonides. Justice Okoro said, raising one hand to stop Gerald. I will hear you, but I will also need an explanation. Of course. Beatrice Solomonides placed a bound document on Nora's table and turned to face the room. Ms. Osi retained our firm last evening. Given the schedule of proceedings and the motion brought by opposing counsel, we moved on an expedited basis. I apologize for the disruption to the court's time. I will be brief. She was not brief in the way that lawyers who say they will be brief are never brief, but she was precise. She laid out Meridian's structure, the asset portfolio, the subsidiary companies, the investors. She explained the value of the firm, calmly and without drama, in the way that one explains something whose size speaks for itself. The number she named was significant enough that Brandon Holt put his hand flat on the table, as if he needed it for balance. Furthermore, Beatrice said, we are prepared to contest the prenuptial agreement on 2 grounds. The first is independent legal advice, or rather its absence. The second, she paused, involves the investment property on Millwood Road. Brandon looked up sharply. The Millwood Road property, Beatrice continued, which Mr. Holt purchased in 2019, was financed in part by a bridge loan. That loan came from a numbered company that Ms. Osi controlled. It was structured informally, no written agreement at Mr. Holt's request, but the financial transfers are documented. In effect, Ms. Osi contributed materially to the acquisition of an asset that is not reflected in her financial disclosure, for the simple reason that the contribution was never formally acknowledged. That was a gift, Gerald Ostroff said, his voice tight. There is no record of a gift, Beatrice said. There is a record of a transfer. The distinction is, of course, something the court will determine. Justice Okoro removed her reading glasses and set them on the desk in front of her. She looked at Brandon Holt with the evaluative neutrality of a woman who has been deciding things professionally for 25 years. Mr. Holt, she said, I am not going to rule today. I am granting an adjournment. I am also. She paused, looking at Gerald Ostroff, placing a temporary hold on the petitioner's personal and corporate financial assets pending further disclosure. Given that the court has now received evidence suggesting the financial picture in this case is materially different from what was previously represented. Your Honor, my client has mortgage obligations. Then I suggest your client speak with his bank, Justice Okoro said. Court is adjourned. Brandon did not look at Nora when the gavel came down, he looked at the table. Tiffany, in the gallery behind him, was no longer leaning into his shoulder. She was sitting straight, her phone already out, her expression not distressed but calculating, the look of a woman revising a plan. Nora gathered her notepad. She did not stay to watch. In the hallway, Kwam the security guard gave her a small nod as she passed. She nodded back. Beatrice Solomonides fell into step beside her. The vehicle on the street, Beatrice said. Or, the vehicle on the street, Nora said. Good, we need to talk about the Millwood property, and the Vancouver offer came through this morning. I have the term sheet, I saw it. Nora pushed open the glass door and they stepped out into the March cold. The sky over downtown Toronto was that particular pale gray that it holds for weeks in early spring. The color of something deciding whether to become something else. Let them sit on the freeze for a while. How long can we hold it? The temporary hold? Legally, the court will revisit in 21 days. But the bank will start calling him within the week. Good. Nora found her car, the Honda with the small dent above the rear wheel well, that she had never bothered fixing because she had never bothered performing. She unlocked it. Do you want him destroyed? Beatrice asked, not unkindly. It was a professional question. Nora thought about it. She thought about the 12 years. She thought about the dinner parties where Brandon had waved his hand and said she did small business stuff. She thought about the morning he had slid the prenuptial agreement across the kitchen table and said, smiling that other smile, it's just a formality, we'll never need it. She thought about the $400,000 she had lent him for Millwood Road, because he had asked her late on a Thursday night with the particular softness he had when he needed something. And she had said yes because that was still the period when she said yes, when she still believed that what they had was worth protecting. She got into the car. I want what's fair, she said, nothing more, but I want all of it. The 21 days were not quiet days. By the third day, Brandon had retained a second lawyer, a more senior one, a woman from a firm on King Street West, who Brandon presumably felt would be better equipped for what was now clearly a different category of situation than the one he had anticipated. The second lawyer's first call to Beatrice was professional and exploratory. The second call 3 days later was less confident. The third call was a request for a meeting. Nora let Beatrice manage the meetings. She was in Vancouver for 4 days and then in Calgary for 2 and then back in Toronto for a board session that had been on the calendar for 6 weeks. She was not hiding from the proceedings, she was simply running a company, which was what she had been doing for 7 years while Brandon was telling people she dabbled. Tiffany moved out of the Leaside house on the 12th day. Nora knew this because the neighbor across the street, a retired teacher named Mrs. Ochterberg, who had once brought Nora a plate of butter tarts the week she moved out, sent her a message. The girlfriend left this morning, she wrote, 3 carloads. No truck, in case it matters. It didn't matter to Nora, but she appreciated Mrs. Ochterberg. On the 18th day, Brandon called Nora directly. It was the first time he had called her personal number since before the divorce was filed. She let it ring twice. Then she picked up. He said her name. Just her name, the way a person says a name when they don't know where to start. Brandon. Her voice was even. I didn't know, he said, about Meridian. I didn't know any of it. I know you didn't. Why didn't you? He stopped himself. He tried again. Were you planning this? Was the whole thing a setup? Nora was sitting at her kitchen table in the condo on Gerrard Street, the one that was not the Leaside house, with a cup of rooibos tea going cold beside her. Through the window, the March sky was starting its daily negotiation with something that might eventually become spring. No, she said. I wasn't planning it, I was protecting myself. Those are different things. Silence. The Millwood money, he said finally. I know that was real. I know what that was. It was real. I can make it right, Nora. We can settle this properly. I know Ostroff pushed too hard. I know the prenup was, Brandon. She kept her voice the same. Calm, not warm and not cold. I am not angry at you. I want you to hear that. I was for a while. But I'm not anymore. I just want what was mine returned to me, and I want to move forward. Beatrice will handle the details. And after that? After that, we don't have any more business with each other. And that's fine. We had 12 years. There were good years in there. But we're done now, and that's okay too. He didn't say anything else for a moment, and then, I called you boring once. At Dave and Anita's, at that dinner. I said you were? I remember. I didn't mean it, I know, she said, but you said it. Which means some part of you believed it, which means you were looking at me and not seeing me. That's what ended us, Brandon. Not what you said, just the fact that you stopped seeing. She hung up. She sat for a moment with the dead phone in her hand, then she put it down and picked up her tea, which was cold, and drank it anyway. The settlement was negotiated over 4 days of mediation in a room on Richmond Street with a mediator named Howard, who wore the same gray sweater each day, and who was very good at sitting quietly while other people talked themselves toward resolution. Nora was there for the first day and the last. Beatrice handled the middle days. What Nora received, in the end, was this. The Millwood Road property, or the equivalent of its current appraised value. A portion of the investment portfolio that reflected the period during which Meridian's income had been quietly supporting Brandon's lifestyle while he called it small business stuff, and formal written acknowledgement that the prenuptial agreement had been signed without independent legal advice, which mattered less as a legal instrument and more as a fact that was now on the record. She did not take the Leaside house. She didn't want it. She had never particularly liked the kitchen. Brandon kept the house and the debt that came with it, and the memory of Tiffany's 3 carloads disappearing down the street on day 12. The settlement was signed on a Tuesday afternoon in early April. After it was done, Nora shook Howard the mediator's hand and thanked him, and then she and Beatrice walked out onto Richmond Street in the April cold, which was still cold enough to matter, and Beatrice said, "That is the cleanest resolution I have managed in 11 years. You did well," Nora said. "You did the work," Beatrice said. "I just showed up with the paperwork." They shook hands, and then Nora walked back to her car. 3 months later, Meridian Capital Partners was named one of the 25 most influential private investment firms in Canada by Report on Business magazine. The feature ran with a photograph of Nora standing in the Meridian office in the Exchange Tower, in a suit that fit the way things fit when you've stopped dressing to disappear, looking directly at the camera. She framed it and put it on the wall, not to remind herself of anything, just because she liked the photograph. She was 33 years old and she had a company and a rooibos tea habit and a Honda with a dent above the rear wheel, well, that she still had not bothered fixing. She had a condo on Gerrard Street that was quiet in the mornings and bright in the afternoons. She had Patience Anand and Beatrice Solomonides and Miss Achterberg across from the house she no longer lived in, who occasionally still sent her messages about butter tarts and neighborhood news. She did not have Brandon. She did not have the performance of being small. She had instead everything that was hers. Every last piece of it, finally in the right place, finally visible in the light.